Hey everyone, it's Kara Crossway Brindle. Welcome back to the channel. Familiar face. I have Vicki with us again. Hi, Vicki.
Hey, what's up?
All the things. I
I
know we wanted
know.
to come back together. We wanted to come back together on the channel because we left people on a cliffhanger, which is here you were, a person willing to talk about your process of exiting, like kind of like saying, hey, goodbye to clients. It's time to move on to something else. I'm burnt
Yeah.
out. And here we are in the middle of your process from what you've just told me offline. So
hmm
our viewers, here's Vicki again, sharing more on her experience. I'm so excited to have this conversation. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for asking too, because it swirls around in your head. And then when somebody asks you to talk about it and they know what you're talking about, not like friends outside of the profession, it's
Yeah,
always nice. It kind of starts to tether things or cut cords or whatever you want to call it. And it's helpful. So thanks.
yeah, absolutely. So obviously, not going into too much detail because there's still clients you're working with in this stage, but you want to tell people in a snapshot where you're at now in your journey?
I had decided to section out my caseload to, three or four people at a time to let them know that I was moving on. And so that I didn't have to do a ton of exit sessions and not knowing, how people were going to respond. I felt like that was going to be more helpful for me. Plus, I wanted to keep some income coming in. And so that was my process. And so I have basically exited out three clients, graduated them, and they were the clients that I felt, um, let's see, presupposing that they might feel a little itchy scratchy about the change, and was pleasantly surprised
Mm.
that they were able to roll with it. Took an ego hit on that one.
Don't we all? We're like, I thought you'd be sad. And you're like, okay.
Right. But thankfully, the way I guess the way it was offered and how we processed out was beneficial. And
Mm.
so yeah, so I am through, we'll go ahead and say I am through with graduating three folks right now, and now preparing to move to some, three other folks at a time.
Yeah. So, in the big grand scheme of things, how many clients did you have at the start of this process that you're like, I have to do this process with? Like, is it a big caseload? Is it a small caseload? What's kind of the rough number of people?
I had about 20, a little over 20 people on my caseload.
Yeah, decent
Um,
size there.
yeah, I've been paring down all over the past last year anyway. I'm not taking clients, but I'm a good people pleaser. So when I would say no to like three new people that reached out, like the fourth person I would get me, right? I'd just be
Yeah.
like, I can't say no to everyone. So I
Yeah.
actually took a few new clients as I'm looking down at my list over here. I actually took a few new clients, and yeah, it's hard to admit this, but I've taken a few new clients even the beginning of this year because in my process of determining to move from therapy to coaching, I also realized that there are a couple of um, small groups of
Mm.
people that I enjoy working with, and that I wanted to leave that open. And if anyone showed up and met that criteria, I would continue working with them.
Hmm.
And so a few folks have, and I felt good about that. I
Yeah.
still did
That's
the
part of your
intake and all that
process.
kind of stuff. Yeah. hmm
Hmm.
Yeah. And I have
Gotcha.
worked with a few people too, though, that met that criteria. And then we talked, and I was like, this isn't going to work. Only because they really needed something else.
Mm.
So probably don't want to do that anymore.
I appreciate the transparency on our video of like, this is a work in progress, right? Of like, there's no
Right.
one way to do it. And I definitely can relate to you of like there's something about, oh, I like this population, or I'm intrigued by this person, I want to work with them. But then like anchoring in, is this the right fit? Is this actually going to get them what they need? And does it
Yes.
fit a therapy model versus a coaching model?
Right.
Like so many questions we have to ask in our heads about that as you reduce a caseload and then eventually build this coaching caseload, right?
Right. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So I imagine some of our viewers want to know if there was like a script that you said for these first three clients. Like, how did you eventually broach? I know when we talked and we recorded, I think you hadn't finessed the language just yet of like how you were going to tell them. You just had made the decision, I'm going to tell them. If I'm
Yes.
remembering correctly, it feels like ages ago, even though it was only last winter.
Yeah,
Um,
seriously.
but anything
Yeah.
you want to tell people about how the language went? I know you said ego hit, but like you obviously said something that was encouraging, empowering for the client or clients.
To let them know I was leaving or yeah,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Yeah, I crafted an email. I talked to a few other therapists and I said, not sure whether to carve out something in the very beginning of a session and let them know or give them an email. And she said, hey, when I went on sabbatical, I got consultation and the consultation was send them an email, let them sit with it, let them have
Mm,
their initial reaction, don't put them on the spot. And then the next time you're talking, you can process it. And
yeah.
so that felt like, whew, okay, that's much easier to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Like
Um,
your own discomfort of, I don't have to see the reaction. They're having this at home.
right, right. Which I felt like I was kind of cheating some kind of therapeutic
Mm,
relationship responsibility, but I followed that. And I also got my supervision group to read the email
mm,
and give me feedback. And so I sent that and I was honest with them and I said, I'm shifting to coaching, but I'm also going to stay in therapy and work with these, this particular group of folks. And that particular group of folks is therapists, honestly. So like
yeah. Ah, my
transparent. So
people. Hmm.
yeah. So they did not qualify to be a therapist. And so that I got feedback that that was understandable.
Yeah.
I don't qualify. You're going to continue to be a therapist to certain people, but since I'm not a therapist, I don't get to be part of that. Um, and yeah, the initial reaction was with a few people was hard.
Mm,
They weren't happy and they had kind of ridden the wave of that, their own reaction on their own and were able to tell me about it. But I continued to say, throughout this period of time, I'm going to ask and I need you to be as honest as you can about where you are with this move.
yeah.
So,
Because I imagine not only is that a processing moment, but it also helps you craft what's the next steps for them of like graduation, referrals out, if they still have work to do. For folks who are doing like heavier or trauma work, like does it make sense to continue up until the end, or is it like let's wrap up now and get you somebody
mhm,
new? This is
mhm,
echoing a couple other colleagues who have made that pivot, that transition, and just checking
mhm,
it out with clients, right? Like we can't read their minds; they got to tell us what they need.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And, everyone said I don't like I would check in with them throughout, like the end of the first month, the end of the second month, because we did 90 days to process out. I would not do that again. I would do 60 days. It was way too long. And I overestimated their reaction, or I overestimated their, you know, their ability to transition. I was like, they're going to need a lot of time, but so we dragged
Yeah.
that out too much. But I checked in with them and I checked in with them then every week leading up to that last session. And even leading up to that, two sessions before we ended, people were like, it doesn't really feel real.
Mm,
And it was difficult to know what to do in those sessions, honestly, because I let them know that we were processing out and I knew that they were going to still be needing to talk about what we had been working on. Just because I dropped this
sure.
email in their box doesn't mean that stops. So
Mm-hmm.
that was awkward for me to know and to maneuver. So I just started saying I'd like to spend 15 minutes today talking about processing out, and the rest of the time, what we need, what's on, on your calendar, or what's on your list for today. And
Yeah.
um,
Mhm.
so,
Yeah. So it sounds like some reflection with us here in real time in this video is like 60 days, not 90 days. A little bit of an
right.
ego hit when you thought they'd have bigger reactions, and some were very resilient and flexible and like, let's move on, let's adjust, let's go for
Mhm.
it. I also had that
Mhm.
experience when I pivoted with one client in particular, and I shared this in the video. She was like, "This is my first opportunity to try on a therapist that I picked, not a family member picked
Right.
for me." So like I thought there'd be a bigger emotional reaction, and it was actually a very empowered reaction. But yeah, also ego
Mhm.
hit of like, oh, but also that was my own stuff. People pleaser, right? Like all of us have a little bit of
Right.
people pleaser.
Yeah.
Um, any other reflections or advice for folks, our colleagues who might be going through a process like this? Like you're saying, shorter is probably a little bit better than 90 days. 90 days does feel like a long time when you say that
Mhm.
here on this video.
Yeah.
Anything else you want them to think about in the process?
I also want to say one thing before that is I
Mm,
recognize that a couple of clients started really showing up to the sessions, like the
mm.
things that were kind of lingering. Like, and I started questioning, should I end with this person because they're
Or show it up.
working, they're
Hmm.
working and getting traction on what they've wanted to get traction on. Like, this is
Yeah,
fabulous. Should I, keep this going? But, I've had feedback about like, yeah, I just felt like there was a deadline to do a
yeah.
project and
Like
I had to finish
kicked
that
me into
project.
gear. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's more about the client's motivation than it is about you, right? Of like, oh, I
Right.
now I have more focus, more attention of I have this many sessions left with Vicki, so I better make the
Mhm.
most of it kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted that came to me while you were
Mm.
talking and asking a completely different question. I mean, I would think that look at who this is how I did it. So I looked at who I was seeing, I looked at who I believe needed to have 90 days to process out. And I looked at who I was seeing weekly, I looked at who was coming in every other week, and knowing that folks that come in weekly might not need 90 days. The folks
Sure.
that come in every other week might need 90 days so they have the same amount of sessions or whatnot. Um, I also felt like I did some research about like how do you end with people, right? And just made notes to myself of like, remember you are not getting into new territory, and so I just had my little cheat sheet sitting right next to me every
Mm.
time we logged on. And it kept me on track because I could have gone on autopilot for what we were doing and how we had been handling sessions in the past.
Yeah.
And again, I would think if you want to stagger it, it seems like a little less emotional responsibility to process grief or endings or um, so I gave myself that time. Yeah, so far those are really the only nuggets I have, unless
Yeah.
I want to add anything as I go into this this next
You were
phase that
like heads up,
I've
here's
been
what's
thinking
next.
about.
I mean, I think so many people that you and I are working with therapists at this point, or the pivot towards therapists. The question I get a lot is, how do I do an ending session? So you kind of alluded to this
Yes.
earlier when you're like, what is the structure of the last session?
Hmm.
Funny enough, I wrote a blog in the pandemic about conscious graduation because it felt really weird in the pandemic to graduate someone from therapy, if I'm being honest, because like the
Hmm.
world was in crisis. So it already felt like a
Hmm.
incongruence in my mind. But some of them were
Hmm.
thriving in this new environment of home life or homebody, or
Right.
everything was organized in their case. Not they're the exception, not the rule. But do you
Hmm.
have any thoughts on like, did you have certain topics, or did you have another cheat sheet of like, here are the things I want to touch on with the very last session for the three folks you've closed?
Yes, I do. I have three sections that I go through, and three sections that I created, maybe five questions, maybe reflective questions. And I couldn't tell you what those are right now.
No worries. That's
as
okay.
far as my section. But my recall right now is not coming to me very quickly. But it was basically, where have you been?
Yes.
Give yourself some props. What are you taking from this?
I love
And
that.
then, the last section was basically like, hey, was there any stuck points that you and I got into? Was there any time that it didn't feel safe to do the work? It was a little bit like I wanted them to give me some feedback because you don't often, if ever, get an exit interview as a
Right.
therapist with a client.
Sure.
So I really felt like I trusted their take on our work. We had had enough time together, and I wanted to hear about it. And people were um, not going to give me constructive feedback. I learned that. So I'm going
Yeah.
to keep that question in, but I thought I'm just going to see what they say.
Sure.
So I send that to them about a week ahead of time of the last session so that they have time to prep. And then we just go over it in the session. And I let them know the second to the last session, hey, next session, we're not going to go into anything except these
Mm.
questions. This is really going to be our closing out time. It can take as long as we want. You can end early. Um, the other thing that I do is the morning of, I write a letter to them.
Oh.
And
Hmm.
I basically email it to myself, and then I'm going to wait 30 days and send that email to them. I was going to send them a hard copy card, and I just felt like I'll just send them this. It might be nice
Mm.
to get a card in the mail. I might do that, but at some point. But that really felt good for priming me for the session because
Hmm.
I I wanted to honor that it was also an ending for me,
Right.
and I wanted to give them something to take with them from our work together and not just their reflection. And
Yeah.
that might be, completely no doubt. Like, yeah, we really do need to give them something as, a little attachment, something, another object or whatnot. But I, I realized when I did that it really got me in a heart space.
Mm.
Um, because quite honestly, I had been pulling back once I knew that these were the folks I wasn't going to be working with anymore. I
Right.
started noticing that, this is hard to admit, but I wasn't as present, like emotionally present, because I was just protecting myself because
Of
I
course.
wasn't sure
That's so
what
natural.
they were
Hmm.
going to, yeah, what they were going to bring up. So it really put me right back into a heart space. And
Hmm. Beautiful.
that was good.
Yeah, I mean, very similar to you for viewers who just want an echo, because I also have done some of this work myself. It was the gear up of like prepare. I actually like that you sent them the questions ahead of time. I have a formula, but I don't send it ahead of time. I'm just like, and here are the three questions I have for you.
Mhm.
Which usually starts with the where have you been, like you had of like
Mhm.
sometimes I'm like, do you remember where you started when we worked
Yes,
together,
that's
right?
it.
And like reflect. And sometimes they're like, no, Kara, I don't remember. And I'm like, okay, well, I remember. And then I'll like rehash
Exactly.
out like you started here and here are all the things we did and like just like broad
Yes.
strokes, right? But from a place of
Yes.
enthusiasm of look how far you've come. And then
Exactly.
I'll ask them more about their strengths. Sometimes I'll ask if they're continuing with another therapist. One of my favorite questions is, what do you need in your next provider? What do you next need in your next therapist?
We
Um,
are we are on it.
yeah,
That is,
yeah. It's like
yep.
if I'm
Hmm.
not your person anymore, like what? And I think that goes with
Hmm.
the feedback question of like, if I wasn't a fit in all areas, what do you need for the next person, right? Of like, let's
Exactly.
normalize that. Do you need a therapist of
Yes.
color? Do you need someone who does brain spotting? Like having them advocate and like articulate, this
Hmm.
is what I need. Sometimes I've done that
Hmm.
earlier in the process because I am giving them a warm handoff or a referral. But
Right.
sometimes it's
Right.
in the future. If you needed therapy again, what are you looking for? And that
Right.
also goes hand in hand with question four, which is how will you know if you need to come back to therapy? And that's not with me, right? Like just like you're like the door is closed. Like what would you have to
Yes.
see in yourself to come back to therapy? I have to have this many symptoms. I have to have this long. Like I mean, some clients are very
I
concrete
like
like that.
that.
But hearing their own voice say that out loud and me holding that space, I think gave them permission of like, okay, now I know what to look for. Like, I'm fine right
Mhm.
now, but if stuff starts to go downhill, I can come back to
Mhm.
therapy because you and I can agree it's an open invitation. It just doesn't always mean it's with us.
Yeah.
So those are the questions I tend to ask folks. Obviously, if they're graduating therapy, as in we finished our goals, that feels even more celebratory versus someone who's
Mhm.
transitioning because I pivoted or you pivoted or they're
Mhm.
not a fit any longer. And then for some folks, it's a transitional object or a gift. I actually do write cards because I feel like some clients, words of affirmation, people like will hold on to the card, but they don't
Mhm.
always. I've never had a client want to read it with me. Like they're like, I'll read that later. I don't know if I want
Yes.
to read it right now. I'm like, that's fine. I
Yeah.
didn't expect you to in front of me. That actually feels more awkward.
Mhm.
But I know some colleagues will give like little seed packets or a little,
Yes.
stress ball or something that's transitional. Like, here's the work we did.
Mhm.
But of course, that's contingent on knowing that you're graduating them or referring them out.
Mhm.
It's not for the spontaneous, I didn't know this was our last session person.
Mhm.
This feels like very much planned. So,
Yes.
any thoughts on all that? It sounds like very in alignment, you and I, with that.
Yep, you brought a lot of my memory back around it. Yeah. And then we also we also spent time after the first month. I let them know like now we are going to be talking about who you want to work with next. So
Beautiful.
that we have 2 months of you letting me know who you want to work with and me going to my Rolodex, haha.
Yep.
And then you've got, 6 weeks to interview some people and come back and say, none of these people are as brilliant as you are. I don't know what I'm going to do, and so we
Exactly.
process it. Or, like I found somebody, I actually want to go ahead and start with them, right? So that we
Yeah.
have another long runway. I liked that period of time for that. But I think what I will do with the next few folks is I will just let them know that, 1 or 2 sessions after they get the email that it's time to start looking for somebody, and I want to make sure that you have enough time to
Yeah.
interview and come back and um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah.
Really putting that in their homework, in their agenda. Like, I
Oh
need you to start
yes.
putting in some time and energy there while you create this container for like the worry, the anxiety, the fear, the oh my gosh,
Yeah.
this is such a process to outreach and do the consult call, but like it's necessary, it's important. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I imagine if we had a third video together, we would be talking to you after you finish referring out all the folks on the caseload. In the meantime, I know you're also trying to like give yourself some space between the private practice and the coaching. Is that right? Of
Hmm.
like looking at like how to regroup or address
Hmm.
burnout or any of the things. What would you say
Hmm.
about that?
There is a fantasy I have about taking a sabbatical. It is a fantasy because
Mm-hmm.
I did a lot in 2023 to address my burnout as far as like that's the year for me. I'm not going to do as much as I think I'm going to do building a coaching business. So with a limited caseload and limited income coming in, doing a
Mm-hmm.
sabbatical is not practical. But what I have done is I've taken one more day off a week. So I only work 3 days a week.
Nice.
Um, and every other week, I don't have a lot of folks, because they're on an every other week schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So having that buffer time, plus it's also giving me time to do practice peer coaching with folks and um, and get my priorities um, straight, I'll say, get my priorities to my, like written down somewhere where it's like, what am I creating? Where am I going? Because I've been throwing spaghetti at the wall, while I've been doing therapy work, I've just been throwing spaghetti at the wall with coaching. So I'm much more intentional about that business creation
Mm-hmm.
right now and recognizing that strategy is of the utmost importance. And that is not a high skill set that I have. So I do need time to just be creative and let my mind rest and let those things emerge. So that's the learning curve I'm on right now is how to create
Yeah.
that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hear the phrase work on the business, not in it, as part of your
Yes.
process of like, I need space and creativity and some boredom in here somewhere to allow yourself to get
Yes.
clarity. And we don't usually have
Mhm.
that when we're in the hustle of client work all week, every
Mhm.
week. So some more space
Mhm.
would be good for that, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And and I will admit that it's hard being a therapist right now because I've always been all in. And so knowing that one foot is out the door is difficult.
Yeah.
It has become more, I need to be more intentional when I am with my clients. I used to be able to just slip into there, change that space for myself and for us, um and it's different because I am protecting myself from all the personal stuff that comes up of like I am moving from something that I've been doing for a very long time and I
Mm-hmm.
identify with it, and coach is not that much of a difference in identity, but there's a lot I'm sure that's going to be fluffed up as those last folks are not on the calendar.
Yeah, of like just this transformation you're going through, they're going through. The transition doesn't mean it has to be smooth. It's probably emotional, as you just alluded to there. So yeah,
Hmm.
I really appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability and talking about this as we catch you kind of mid process. I know that other folks can resonate with this as they're thinking about it. I know I've got plenty of people who are reaching out saying I'm burnt out. I want to start thinking about this, and to know that it's not a hearts and flowers process, but it will be worth it in the end. I can speak as
Yeah.
someone who's been through it already. You're in the midst of it. Other people are probably going to watch this and be like, "That's me too." So I
Hmm.
just really want to thank you, Vicki, for sharing your story. And I hope we'll catch you for one final video when you're ready to be like, it's done. Here's my
Hmm.
self care. Here's my coaching practice. I'm feeling completely differently. But yeah, right now, raw makes sense of like the client emotion, your emotion.
Yeah.
That's bringing back some memories too of like, it wasn't
Yeah.
easy, but it was worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Mhm.
you can't do anything about it for me.
No, other than
Yeah.
validate and
You
like
can't
hold.
you can't grease the track for me a little bit.
No, I mean, I feel like as I'm reflecting with you in real time, I think for other, this is not how I do things, so I'm going to own that. But I think for other people, I would say create space between the two things. Create space between therapy and coaching, or therapy and courses, or therapy and being a professor,
Yes.
whatever they move towards. I tend to have 4 or 5 irons in the fire, as everyone on this channel knows, because of what I put on the channel.
Hmm.
So like for me, I was building kind of like you are. I'm building as I'm exiting, and I think that takes a different energy level, and that's not sustainable for everyone. I think it
Hmm.
lessened the emotional sadness for me, or the emotional toll, by being like,
Hmm.
I'm building as I'm saying goodbye over here.
Hmm. It
Um,
does.
but I think there would be something really powerful about slowing it down, sitting in the discomfort, really chewing on what's my identity now. I'm always in motion. So, like, that's not going to be how I do it. But for others,
Hmm.
if anyone comes in as a consultee, this is what I'll tell
Hmm.
you to do or
Hmm.
consider.
Hmm.
Um, I know from a place of scarcity or finances or life circumstance, we don't always get that chance to have a sabbatical or break between. So I want to
Yeah.
honor that too. But if it's just a day, I have a lot of clients who are driven, who are like, I exited one job and I started the next job the next day. And I'm like, can we have a weekend? Can we have a day? Like something for a ritual in here. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, I think that's my feedback as we're wrapping up this video. Like, is there a place for intentional slowness? That might be a powerful part of it too. You're doing that here with me because we're talking about it. We're talking it through. So
Hmm.
maybe that's the gift we're giving our viewers of this video of like, think about it, sit in it. Doesn't mean you have to like it.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. It's itchy scratchy right now for sure. But thank you for taking the time and just holding the space for the process, right? And I'll probably post some kind of SOS, thing in one of our Facebook groups that we're in together again, and you can be like, "Oh, that's where you are now. Like, how about come back on and talk about it?" But yeah, it's been helpful. So I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for jumping back in here with me. Again, I hope we can catch you after that bigger transition is done. But if not, maybe we'll just to have a way of updating people who are thinking of you and wishing you well in the transition. So thanks again,
Yeah.
Vicki, for being here.
Thank you. Thanks.
You bet. Viewers, stay tuned for more videos. We'll see you next time.